Welcome everyone. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Helen Byram for this video where we're gonna talk all about health and safety. So what we're going to do is kind of cover a few almost frequently asked questions, either myth busting around health and safety, just to kind of help people and answer a few questions. I know Helen kind of gets certain questions quite often, so we're going to try and cover them off and answer them the best we can. So welcome, Helen.
Morning. Thank you very much.
Do you want to quickly just tell us about Buzz Health and Safety and what you do, and then we'll go into a few other questions.
Okay, so Buzz Safety Consultants is a health, safety and wellbeing consultancy. We are a general health and safety consultancy, but we do have areas that we specialise in as well, those being education, the charitable sector and businesses that work in either great outdoors or the environmental sector as well.
That's perfect, Helen, and a great segue into my first question, actually. Very accidental, but it works well. So you mentioned charities there. Really interested to know how does health and safety, how does it apply? Why does it matter to charities?
Okay, so health and safety law applies to charities in the same way it would apply to any employer, as long as that charity employs just one person.
Okay.
So if you have small sports clubs set up as charities, but they pay somebody to run and work behind the bar, health and safety law will apply. And certainly for larger charities where they have a considerable number of employees, health and safety law applies to that charity in the same way that it would to somebody running a big corporation down the. And something else that's also worth mentioning is that a lot of charities employ volunteers, and under the Health and Safety at Work Act, we have a responsibility to protect the health, safety and welfare of people that we don't employ that might be affected by our business. And that, of course, includes volunteers.
So in terms of the charities, Helen, what common mistakes do they make? What areas do they sometimes miss that's kind of important for them to consider?
So one of the big things that I've noticed with charities is that they focus so much on their core delivery. They exist for a purpose, and that purpose generally is to help other people, whether that be a children's hospice or whether it be providing something else. And what they do is they focus so much on the people that they're trying to help that sometimes they don't focus necessarily enough on the health and safety of their people. It's not to say that they don't care and that they don't have measures in place, but sometimes what they're missing is the nuances of what's required by legislation. One of the other areas as well that charities need to focus on, if they have them, is volunteers. Most charities use volunteers in one way, shape or form. And under the Health and Safety at Work Act, if volunteers are used by an organisation, then they have a responsibility to make sure that they are safe and that their working environment is safe and healthy as well.
That makes sense. So you mentioned earlier, I guess the other industry you mentioned was education, schools. I guess kind of similar question, really. How does that apply? How does health and safety? And it kind of probably to me as a layperson, it seems obvious that health and safety should be very high priority within schools, but it'd be interesting to know how that all that applies.
So again, yes, health and safety law applies. Schools employ people. Now, where the ultimate responsibility for that health and safety lies within the school will depend very much on how that school is set up, but they need to have the same sort of policies and procedures in place as you would expect to find in most businesses. One of the questions I do often get asked is, how does it apply to the students? Well, students have no obligation under health and safety law. However, the school, the employer, has a responsibility in the same way that a charity might have to a volunteer to protect the health, safety and welfare and make sure that the processes that are in place within the school take account of the effects that the activities might have on the pupils, and to make sure that there are measures in place to keep them safe. And by and large, that is done through lesson planning and risk assessment underpinning that lesson planning. So the students won't even necessarily know that there are measures that are being put in place, but actually the school goes through the process and makes sure that the arrangements that are in place are safe for the students that are there. So that's a question I often get asked: how does it apply to students?
Oh, absolutely. No, it makes sense, because it's not something you really think about it from that angle, but that's great. So another area I know that you kind of work a lot in, Helen, is around kind of the outdoors, the people in the outdoors environment. So it'd be interesting to know kind of what kind of challenges and what differences they are for businesses compared to, say, me sat in an office. It kind of sounds it sounds pretty obvious that there will be differences. Be interested to know what those differences are.
Well, I love working in health and safety in the outdoors. I think because it can be so unpredictable. So if you think about somebody that's working within an office or within a factory, generally speaking, those environments are fairly static and they are wholly really within our control as long as we've got the processes in place to manage them. Whereas in the great outdoors, that's not the case. You're at the mercy of the elements much of the time. The terrain can be difficult. It can be unpredictable. Access can be difficult, especially if you're going through fields and over fences or through gates. Livestock, for example, bulls in fields, sheep, horses, and of course the weather, particularly depending on the time of year. So those are the issues that really make it working in the great outdoors difficult. And of course, it's not a sanitary environment and nobody wants to see that environment sanitized. So it's, again, striking that balance between what can we reasonably do, but actually we don't want to change the environment. We don't want to sanitize it. We don't want everywhere to have paths and nicely distinguished curbs. If you're sort of walking down a nice footpath or through a wooded area, you want to experience nature. So it can be, again, a bit of a balancing act to get that right. But that's why I enjoy it, because it's different. Not every day is the same. And you can't always just take a set of regulations and apply them. Sometimes it requires a little bit of thinking around and compromise. And that's what I really enjoy about working in the outdoors environment.
Yeah, as you were speaking then, I was kind of thinking that feels like something where you've got to kind of have that balance. You use the word balance. That's the word I was thinking of, between the rules, the laws and everything like that, and quite common sense, basically, and kind of trying to find that middle ground, which, again, for a layperson like myself, I wouldn't really know where to start. And I guess that's where someone like yourself comes in to kind of offer that, benefit of experience, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of it is the benefit of experience. And I spent a lot of my early career working in an environment with somebody that had specialised in this area. And when I started sort of shadowing him and going out with him, I remember thinking, but this is just so woolly. How do you make these decisions? And it is about experience. It is about understanding human behaviour, and it is about understanding the different ways in which you can bring measures in place, sort of using a strip of vegetation, for example, to mark, to delineate a path where people should be walking, and to keep them away from unprotected edges, rather than just sticking a great big massive metal barrier in place, which is going to completely ruin the environment that you're within. So there are different ways to do things, and it's about experience and what is reasonable and what can you do, and alternative ways that you can do things and manage things, rather than just putting those sort of big mechanical fixes in place, which would sort the issue all right, but would look absolutely terrible and probably mean that nobody actually wanted to go and visit that place anymore, if you're talking about, for example, a tourist destination.
No, absolutely. So I want to move on. So one of the, I guess this is maybe a kind of part myth busting, part frequently asked question, is about when or who these health and safety laws apply to. I guess that's something a lot of people don't know, whether it does to them and when it does to them. So do you want to kind of just cover off that?
Yeah, certainly. So health and safety law is always going to apply if you have employees, regardless of whether you are self-employed or whether you are a limited company or another kind of organisation. If you have employees, health and safety law will always apply. It will always also apply if you have an occupation that's specifically mentioned within regulations. So, for example, if you are working construction, health and safety law is always going to apply. If your work poses a risk to other people, then again, the health and safety law is always going to apply. So if you might consider somebody who is self-employed, has no employees, such as maybe a carpet cleaner, and they're going into people's homes, and they are cleaning carpets, there are actually certain risks that are associated with that. And one of the things you hear about frequently is somebody walking straight off a carpet that's been cleaned onto a laminate or a lino floor and slipping over. Okay, so there's a clear risk there associated with the activity that they do that might put others, i.e. their customers, at risk. So health and safety law will apply to them. But if you are self-employed and you don't have any employees and your business poses no risk to anybody else, So if you think about somebody that's permanently home-based, such as an accountant, they do all their business online, they don't go out, they don't see anybody. Health and safety law may not, I'm not saying it will not, but it may not apply to them. One of the other things that I hear a lot is, I don't have 5 or more employees, so therefore health and safety law doesn't apply. That really isn't the case. The law says, and it's a bit of a peculiar quirk, and one that I'm not necessarily sure that I personally agree with, is that if you have less than 5 employees, you don't have to write your health and safety arrangements down. The problem with that, of course, is that if you don't write them down and something goes wrong, you still need to be able to provide some kind of evidence that you have a system in place. And if you've got nothing written down, then that's really, really very, very difficult. If you have 5 or more employees, you have to have written policy and written health and safety arrangements. And you certainly need to be able to evidence that you've got.
Absolutely, makes sense. And I guess kind of the final question I have is, I guess it's not the same for everybody, these things. So it's kind of that uncertainty. So I guess the advice would be, ask someone who knows what they are talking about. Ask an expert like yourself or anyone. If you're just not sure, ask the question if it's relevant for them. Would that make sense?
Yeah, ask the question, and I'd also say that, have a little look at some of the resources online if there's something that you're not sure about. The HSE do have some good resources on their website, which is hse.gov.uk. It's always worth a look. But I'm always more than happy if somebody's got a question, they want to just give me a call. I'm quite happy to spend 5 minutes just working through something with them on the phone to help them to understand. And then, of course, if following that they want further support, that can be arranged. But yes, always ask somebody. Health and safety consultants aren't as stuffy and boring as we look, I promise.
Well, thank you very much for this, Helen. And what we'll do is all your details we'll put with this video, so people, if they do want to contact you, they know where to do that. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, Helen.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Mike.